So today we have the fifth Lenten Lighthouse coming from the Gospel, and I've named it My Father's House. So the fifth Lenten Lighthouse is My Father's house. So in the Gospel today, Jesus goes into the temple and there's an incident. Jesus accuses the money lenders and those that have set up a market there. You've turned the Father's house into a marketplace and you've got to stop it. Separate the worship from the making of money. And it couldn't be more unambiguous. He turns over tables, tells people to get out of the temple. Now, Jesus is to be the centre of our worship, and we're not to get distracted, which is a very important lesson during Lent, so that we have a chance of activating our baptismal promise. Lent's the time of purifying us from that which is not really central to the worship of God. Just two examples. There's a helpful separation here. I remember I was talking to a person when I was in Fatima in Portugal last year for the World Youth Day before we went down to Lisbon. And I don't know if any of you have been to Fatima, the world-acclaimed Marian shrine, but this person who's been to them all around the world says Fatima's the best, and he said it's the best because they've clearly separated the devotions that are prayed there from all the devotional stores, the little shops that sell rosary beads and everything. And he indicated that there are a couple around the world that you have to go through almost a jungle of these devotional stores where you have to buy things before you actually get to the place. And then when you get there, still it's undifferentiated. But that's interesting, isn't it? It's a good separation. Yes, of course we need to buy rosary beads and little statues for little mementos, all the rest of it. But once we get to the place of worship, we shouldn't be distracted. We can say the same about coming to Mass, I suppose. Some people complain that there's too much talk before Mass and after the Mass, and at any rate, the idea that when you come into a church there should be reverence. What about our homes? That's a nice way of looking some sort of separation. Some of you have told me that as your children leave the nest, there's a few more rooms that are a bit spare in the house, and a number of you have designated one of the spare rooms as like a little chapel, little prayer room, which I think is a great idea. So you can get away from the pots and pans and the laundry, and you can get away from the garden and the lawn mowing, and this little room here is dedicated to meditation and quiet time. Not everybody's lucky enough to be able to do that with housing shortage in Canberra, and houses are getting smaller into units, but even in a room, is there a corner of a room that you can designate as your prayer corner? I do that where I live. There's a prayer corner there, and it really helps me to centre on prayer. So I think that's a healthy separation, and separating the marketplace, as it were, from the place of devotion, reflecting the teaching of the Gospel. There is sometimes too an exaggerated separation of worship and everyday life. I remember not so long ago, I won't mention her name, but there was a Hollywood movie star. She basically said in an interview, "I'm not religious, but I have a deep yearning inside myself." Well, when I listened to that, I thought, you're not religious, but you have a deep yearning. To me, the deep yearning is a religious experience. So she separated the deep yearning from the religious. I think, by the way, if she meant religious, I think she probably meant organised religion in the sense of churches, mosques, temples. Not into that, but she's gone and sort of felt that inside she can somehow or other encounter something that's a yearning, but she didn't mention the word God. But that yearning is of God. It is a religious experience. Often you hear that, I don't want to align myself with irrelevant churches. They're all sort of in the past, but I'm a person of the future. I believe in science. And off we go with theirs. So the churches are all behind the scene, but generation behind the rest of us. And I always cringe at that. I'll be out of a job if that got too popular. Sometimes people say the churches are a generation behind the rest of us, but I tend to think the churches are a generation in front of everybody. Because the trouble is when you get rid of the churches and all the rest of it through secularism, which separates them far too strongly, and also, and this is understandable, the scandal of the churches, especially through the sex abuse and people's real abhorrence, and rightly so, of the lacking of moral authority in the churches. And so that's very understandable as we think of the victims of sex abuse. But let's not throw out, as they say, throw out the baby with the dirty water. Be careful of over-separating the two. And two little comments on that. The first of all, the religious instinct that's in everybody, the yearning that's in, is a social experience. You can't believe on your own. We are social beings. We need to communicate. We need to be with each other. I have to say this because Australia is becoming one of the loneliest places on the planet. And Canberra is often ticked as one of the loneliest cities in Australia. People living on their own, feeling that that's great, I'm all on my own, I'm independent. The trouble is I'm very lonely. Why? Because we're social beings. Family life, social clubs, sporting clubs, hobby clubs, they're all important. And so let's keep that in mind. Secondly, if you feel that you can make your own church in yourself, you better have a bigger bank account because it's quite expensive and also eclectic. I notice when people have moved into that sort of false ideology that I'm my own religion, I can pray to God on my own, I don't need anybody else. They often have to buy a lot of books and that, a lot of videos and all the rest of it, and sort of objects that are eclectic, that they come from cherry-picking different religions, especially Oriental religions, which seem to be the flavour of the month for that at the moment. And they can have all sorts of paraphernalia around, but it's really, quite unnecessary to do that. And it's a dead-end street, obviously, when there's no community aspect there. I notice this particularly with some people who get almost addicted to astrology and the signs of the zodiac and feel that they've got to have that latest thing about what's going to happen to me next week. But that's an abuse of our human freedom. God doesn't have it all predetermined and you're like a robot, you're just going to go what's already planned for you. I mean, that's why the church has never encouraged that, although for a pastime and a bit of a giggle, okay, but I suppose, but to really believe this is important, that the signs of the zodiac will tell you what the future week's going to be, and you really cash into that, then be careful. That diminishes you as a human being. So that's an exaggerated separation, and that's the fifth Lenten Lighthouse, my Father's house.